The first time Sahir heard the legend, he was 9 and hiding beneath his grandmother's loom. Outside, midday heat hammered the adobe walls, but inside the courtyard cool shadows gathered, and the older women spun tales to distract their tired hands. One woman spoke of caravan routes, another of lost oases swallowed by sand. Then grandmother cleared her throat and told them all about the ruby rain. Once every 1,000 years, she said, the sky forgot it was made of ordinary water. The clouds blushed red as pomegranate seeds, and a warm, shimmering downpour swept across the barren expanses. In the span of a single night, the desert merciless golden ancient burst into a living tapestry of scarlet poppies, indigo irises, silver-flecked ferns, and fruits so sweet they tasted of dawn. By morning, the blossoms fell away, the petals drifted back into sand, and a world returned to its first. Anyone lucky enough to stand in that hot stroke of time, grandmother finished, would carry the memory of blooming forever. Years passed, and Sahiro grew into a guide, his face wind-etched, his eyes bright with restless questions. He led merchants from port to port, escorted pilgrims toward hidden shrines, and even smuggled reluctant princes across borders drawn only on maps. Yet each evening, when the sun dissolved behind dunes like molten bronze, the old tale rose within him. It hovered between campfire sparks and the hush of stars, telling him something vast still waited beyond the next horizon. Most men dismissed the ruby rain as myth. They pointed to empty skies and said, "Where is this miracle?" Sahir only smiled. He had not forgotten the tremor in his grandmother's voice, that peculiar edge between warning and wonder. One autumn, in his 33rd year, a letter sealed in violet wax reached him at a border outpost. The message was brief. "I have found proof. Meet me in Red Silence Canyon before the 13th night of the waning moon. Layla bint Idris." Sahir knew the name. Layla was a scholar who mapped forgotten constellations and translated inscriptions from stones so eroded most people mistook them for ordinary boulders. She and Sahir had crossed paths twice, once during a sandstorm in which they shared a single water skin, another time in the capital's library, where they argued about whether stories could predict the future. Each encounter left Sahir feeling as though he had glimpsed a narrow door inside reality, one he longed to pry open. He left that same night, taking only his white mare, Rasha, 2 flasks of dates and an astrolabe. To reach Red Silence Canyon, he would skirt the salt flats of Kamar, traverse wind-sharpened ridge, and descend into the lowland basin, where heat pooled like waiting breath. 4 days in, a hot sirocco turned the flats into a shimmering mirror. Visibility shrank to a cruel glare. Yet Sahir pressed on, guided by instinct and the faint glow of iron stars seeping through daylight. By dusk on the 6th day, he found the canyon an enormous gash of ruby basalt plunging into the earth, silent indeed, as though the wind had forgotten how to speak. Leela stood at the rim, dark hair unbound, her boots dusted red. She raised a hand in greeting but said nothing until Sahir's mare had drunk deep from a little cistern in the shade. Then, with an urgency that surprised him, she unfurled a scroll of parchment across a flat rock. The parchment was translucent, stitched from slivers of something like mica. Upon it danced rows of tiny symbols, dots and crescents, wings and seeds, arranged in spirals. "I found this fragment in a ruin beneath Al-Khazir Oasis," she said. "It speaks of the Sangha, the crimson falling. Not legend, sequent intervals. It calculates intervals between star alignments, lunar shadows, and volcanic haze. By its count, the next ruby rain will arrive in 12 nights." Sahir touched the scroll. Even in weak light it glowed faintly red. "Why call me?" he asked. "Because the place it will fall is further than one scholar can go alone," she replied. "Because you know the dunes like arteries. Because—" her voice thinned. "Because if we make it, I need someone who believes." They left before dawn. Their destination was Urset, The desolation seer region, so dry carts crumbled, their metal hoops popping off like brittle reeds. No caravan had crossed it in 40 years. Sahir and Layla took only what 2 horses could bear: water, compass, blank journals, seed crystals for navigation, and a bronze hourglass that dripped black sand. On the 3rd evening, clouds marbled the sky, uncharacteristic this early in the dry season. They camped beneath a cliff shaped like a drinking horn, and Layla shared what she had gleaned from further translation. The ruby rain, she said, was not simple precipitation, it was the desert itself, weeping out minerals drawn from deep magma vents, each droplet containing crystalline spores dormant since the planet's formation. The spores borrowed life from starlight during their brief contact with air. Exposure produced flowers in several heartbeats, fruit in minutes. Then, as dawn scattered violet rays, the blossoms collapsed back into dust. It was geological time compressed into a single breath. Sahir listened, entranced. At last he asked the question pulsing in his mind. Have you considered why the desert blooms, only to vanish? Layla fed the fire with a twig and stared into the smoke. Perhaps abundance can break a land built on austerity only for a moment. Perhaps endurance requires forgetting. Maybe the ruby rain is the earth's way of showing what it dreams of but cannot sustain. By day 6, their water skins fell light. Heat shimmered upward like ghost serpents. Worse, Sahir noticed fishes in the ground, fresh and wide, as though something beneath struggled to breathe. One afternoon, they found an abandoned camp. 3 broken wagons, empty jugs, a rusted astrolabe. On a torn banner hung from a mast, someone had painted a single sentence. We came seeking paradise and found only echoes. Layla traced each letter. Did they come for the ruby rain? She wondered aloud. Sahir shook his head. If they came during any year but this one, he said, they would have found only the desert's silence. Night of the 10th day, a sandstorm swallowed them whole. Grit needled their cheeks and rattled inside their ears. They pitched a canvas lean-to against a half-buried boulder and waited. Wind screamed like sheet metal, and Sahir felt the storm tugging at something in his chest. An older fear, a memory even older than his grandmother's tale. He shut his eyes and pictured the desert blooming, tried to anchor his courage to that vision. Hours later, the wind died abruptly, and in its aftermath came an exquisite hush. Through torn clouds, stars shone with sharpened edges. Leela stepped outside the shelter and gasped. Sahir followed. Around them, the sand was no longer gold, but gleamed cinnabar, as though stained by the storm itself. He stooped and let it run through his fingers. Faint sparks glittered in the grains. Layla whispered, the spores. But the sky was clear. No rain had fallen. Sahir's mouth tasted of copper. If the spores already peppered the dunes, the event was near, perhaps closer than her calendar allowed. They forced the horses into a trot through the night, mindful of sinkholes. Twice they saw distant flickers, lighting that left no thunder. At dawn of the 12th day, the landscape rose into shallow hills of black glass, remnants of an ancient meteor strike. Here the ground hummed underfoot, and every step sent ripples of vibration over the surface. In the center of the largest plateau waited a stone arch carved by no human hand. Its sides bore the same spiral script as Layla's scroll. On the lintel, however, stood a pictograph easily understood, a cloud shedding ruby droplets onto a cradle of flowers. Layla approached the arch as if nearing an altar. She pressed her palm to the glyph. The stone answered with a slow pulse of heat. Suddenly the sky darkened, though the sun stood high. A shadow as broad as a continent slid over them. Sahir looked up. Clouds the color of bruised plums gathered, swirling counterclockwise. Lighting forked within, but when the bolts struck the cloud walls, they did not flash white. They glowed crimson. The air thickened, smelling of iron and jasmine. Russia lifted her head and whinnied, pupils rimmed red. "It's early," Layla said, voice trembling. "All our timekeeping was late," Sahir replied. "Either way, it's here." A wind rose, not harsh like sandstorms, but warm and wet, carrying a metallic tang. The first drop struck Sahir's forearm. He flinched, expecting heat, yet the droplet was cool. It beaded there, luminous and perfectly red, then seeped into his skin, leaving a faint warmth. Another drop followed, then a dozen, then a gentle roar as the heavens opened. Ruby rain. It did not fall like ordinary rain. Each droplet was larger, heavier, refracting light into tiny spectra. They struck the dunes and burst in slow motion, sending shimmering ripples across grains. As the crimson water soaked in, the sand convulsed. Small mounds rising, splitting. Shoots spiraled upward faster than time would normally allow. Leaves unfurled, stems thickened, blossoms erupted. Within minutes, the desert around the stone arch transformed into a labyrinthine garden. Flowers glowed with internal luminescence, saffron petals veined with emerald, orchids of liquid silver, vines bearing crystals shaped like peaches. Layla laughed, half sob, half hymn. She plucked a blossom shaped like a star and inhaled. Her eyes widened, color flushed her cheeks. "It smells like the first memory I ever made," she whispered. Sahir touched a vine. It coiled around his wrist like a living bracelet, pulse matching his. Fruit the size of figs ripened, their skins whirling with patterns reminiscent of galaxies. He bit into one, juice cascaded down his chin, tasting of honey, sea salt, and something electric, like the moment before courage. Beyond the immediate bloom, the transformation spread across the horizon in rippling bands. Distant dunes softened into terraced fields of grass the color of nighttime seas. Onyx cacti sprouted translucent thorns that chimed when wind passed. Small creatures emerged, hummingbirds with mirrored feathers, beetles made of opal. They acted neither startled nor new, as though they had always waited beneath the surface for permission. At the heart of the new world, the stone arch shed its dusty crust, revealing rune lines glowing a deep carmine. Layla stepped beneath the archway, and a hush fell over the garden within 20 paces. She beckoned Sahir. When he joined her, the space inside the arch shimmered like heat over water. Images bloomed. Snapshots of earlier millennia, each showing the ruby rain falling upon different wastelands, different wanderers standing where they stood, some clothed in bronze scales, others in feathered cloaks, one appearing almost translucent, as if from a civilization yet to come. A voice sounded, not from outside but within their thoughts, polyphonic, ancient. Witnesses, stewards. The word vibrated in Sakira's bones. Pitches shifted. For each bloom, that same land returned to barrenness, but in the hearts of those who beheld it remained a glowing seed. Some became poets, others architects of water channels, others healers who distilled new medicines by recalling flavors tasted in the crimson night. The voice continued, "Carry forth the memory. Let failure and longing find refuge in what you have seen." Then the images vanished, and the garden's sounds rushed back, leaves whispering like silk, insects trilling crystalline chords. Layla steadied herself against the arch. Tears cut clean tracks down cheeks speckled by ruby drops. "It's asking us to remember for all the days that will come after this night," she said. Sahir nodded. He felt changed, though he couldn't name how. A gentle urgency filled him, the desire to preserve, to nurture, to bring water to parched corners of the world. Hours passed, perhaps minutes. They lost sense. They wandered the living maze, collecting seeds that fell like garnets, pressing petals between pages of their journals, even though the pages turned to silk at each touch. They spoke little, listening instead to the hum of photosynthesis, accelerated to a song. When the moon rose, a thin cichlet's pale light mingled with the garden's glow. Where moonlight struck puddles of ruby rain, they hardened into facets of rose quartz. Layla bent to examine one. When morning comes, will these vanish too? Sahir cupped a shard and felt it pulse. Maybe not everything must vanish, he said. He wrapped the quartz in cloth. Toward midnight, voices carried across blossoms. The hermit appeared, a gaunt figure wrapped in linen, face like sun-cracked stone. Sahir recognized him as Idran, a mystic rumored to converse with dust devils. Idran approached, barefoot, leaving prints that sprouted lilies behind him. He gestured to the marvel around them. "It returns," he rasps. "And again we are unready." His gaze fixed on Leela, then on Sahir. "Tell me, travelers, will you let this vanish as always, or will you be gardeners beyond this night?" Leela answered softly, "We can carry only what we can carry." "Then carry the pattern," Idran said. "Teach the thirsty how to coax water from stone, to build vaults, to store the memory against the drought of forgetting." With that, the hermit walked on, merging with vines that parted then sealed behind him. Clouds thinned after midnight, stars returned twinkling through gaps, and with their appearance the ruby rain eased. The last droplets struck leaves with soft sighs, like the end of applause. Slowly, petals began to wilt, fruit to sink toward soil. Color drained toward the roots in luminous rivers. The garden folded in on itself, not dying, but collapsing into silk cocoons that melted into sand. Yet where the sand reclaimed dominion, it no longer looked lifeless. It shimmered faintly, as if infused with memory. Sahir and Layla hurried to gather what remnants they could. A seed pod shaped like a teardrop, still beating like a tiny drum. A spool of fiber produced by a vine as strong as spider silk. A vial of dew distilled from one of the flowers. Every artifact felt alive. But dawn advanced, and along the edges of light, the living colors receded. By the time the sun's rim peeked over the far dunes, the garden was mostly gone. They stood beside the stone arch, now dull and cracked again, though small flecks of carmine lingered in its grooves. Layla touched its surface. Will it awaken for the next witnesses? She wondered. Sahir looked at the horizon, where the last clusters of flowers folded into dust. "We are part of a chain, 1,000 years wide," he said. "Our task begins now." They turned to their horses, which pawed uneasily at transformed sand. The animals' coats shone, healthier than before. Sahir poured remaining water for them, but they drank sparingly. Perhaps they, too, retained a memory of abundance. Travel back across Ursit took longer, partly because the land reshaped by the rain had shifted dunes into unfamiliar shapes, partly because Sahir and Leela stopped often to test the relics they had salvaged. The teardrop seed they planted in a pocket of sand. Within an hour, it sprouted a single leaf before entering dormancy. The spool of fiber. They wove into a cord stronger than leather. The quartz shard glowed faintly at night, bright enough to write by. When they reached the first settled oasis, people emerged from tents and mud brick houses, pointing at the shimmer along the travelers' satchels. A child approached, eyes wide, and asked, "Did you see the crimson falling?" Sahir knelt and opened his palm, revealing a single petal he'd caught just before dawn. Its color deepened again, as if remembering what it once was. The child's gasp rippled through the gathered crowd. Word spread. By the second day, elders summoned Sahir and Layla to recount everything. They did. The storm of red droplets, the instant garden, the archway's vision, the hermit's challenge. Some listeners wept, others laughed in disbelief. But when Sahir placed the pulsating seed pod onto the council table, and when Layla illuminated the hall with a shard of quartz that needed no flame, doubt evaporated. Work began. Using the fiber, they crafted fine nets for drawing dew from night air. They crushed the quartz into powder, mixing it with clay to form tiles that glowed faintly. Reducing the need for oil lamps, they planted the seed in the oasis's central plaza. Though it did not grow beyond a single leaf, its presence amplified moisture in nearby soil, allowing dates to fatten faster. And in every market, every gathering, Sahir and Layla told the story, not wrapped in myth, but detailed like a map. They taught children to mark lunar cycles against star positions. They urged the drilling of deep wells at sites where the ruby rain had pooled, but beneath those spots lay aquifers, enriched by the brief bloom. Years went by. Sahir aged, his hair dusted silver, yet his eyes held the garden's glow. Layla became head astronomer of the University of Dunes, her lectures weaving celestial mechanics with botany, urging students to see the sky and soil as partners. Together they established the Order of Scarlet Memory, a fellowship devoted to harnessing fleeting wonders to mend prolonged hardships. They sent envoys across deserts archiving tales of other lands where strange rains or lights had flickered. Everywhere they travelled, they left seeds, literal and metaphorical, encouraging communities to believe that even the harshest place could briefly remember paradise and through such memory transform. One winter night, decades later, Sahir felt the desert calling again. He rode alone to Red Silence Canyon. The arch stood unchanged. Yet as he stepped beneath it, a faint pulse greeted him like recognition. He placed his weathered hand upon the stone and spoke softly, "I have carried the memory as you asked. Gardens bloom where none should. Children build reservoirs because they heard our story." For a moment, the canyon air warmed, and Sahir thought he smelled jasmine and iron. Then the pulse faded, but he did not feel loss. Instead, satisfaction settled in his bones. He understood now. The ruby rain's greatest harvest was not the night-blooming garden, but the centuries of care sown by those who witnessed it. When Sahir rode back toward the horizon, dawn was rising, the sky bruised violet. He scanned ordinary blue. He scanned the clouds, half hoping for another impossible miracle, though he knew none would come for another millennium. Still, he smiled, because miracles were no longer confined to that single night. They echoed in waterways, in glowing tiles, in seeds sleeping beneath every courtyard. The ruby rain had fallen once, but its bloom would never fully fade again, as long as even one storyteller, good or scholar, child or elder, kept the memory watered with words and a quiet, resilient faith.